The Be More Pirate is a love letter to anyone who has ever wanted to put a cutlass through their boss, or a pistol through the red tape, or a cannonball through the computer says no. The rules of life that wrap us up and trip us over, the kind of bullshit and the bureaucracy, and the desire to break the rules, not because it's the wrong thing to do, but because it's the right thing to do.
This episode is brought to you by the Redline Report by Brandjitsu. What story is your website telling, and how is it telling it? Are you just talking about yourself, or are you connecting with your customers on a more meaningful level? Find out at brandjitsu.com/redline. If you feel so inclined, you can support the show by like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcast. Also, you can go to patreon.com/RebelRebelPod. The Rebel Rebel is a show dedicated to creative rebels and entrepreneurs all over the world. It's for those people who think audaciously and act courageously in service of making the world a better and more interesting place. In this episode, I sit down with author and pirate scientist Sam Conniff. Sam shares pirate stories and insights from his current work leading the world's largest research study into the human impact of uncertainty. Please welcome Sam Conniff to the Rebel Rebel Podcast. Welcome to the Rebel Rebel. I'm your host, Michael Dargie, and across the world, I have with me Sam Conniff. Sam, how the hell are you?
I am excellent. Thank you for asking, Michael, which is particularly joyous because I have not been excellent recently. So I'm enjoying the moment of being on the upside in some clear blue waters.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to dig into that a whole bunch, but here's the first thing I would like to ask is, where are you in the world?
I am in sunny South London, in a particularly brilliant pocket of South London known as Peckham Rye.
Is it really sunny, or are you pulling my leg?
No, it's been absolutely beautiful. It's a beautiful May day. The Rye is just down the road. The Rye is an old kind of English term for common ground, common land, so kind of park probably in other languages. And it has particular note because it is allegedly where William Blake, the great poet, once saw angels in the trees, and where Queen Boadicea rallied her troops before punishing the Romans, however many thousand years ago that would have been. So it's one of those lovely pockets of London. It's just above the rim of the centre of London, and there are these moments when they have this kind of strategic hillside, and you can look down onto the centre of the city. But we're only 2.5 miles out of the dead centre, so yeah, it has all sorts of strategic importance.
Lovely. And now, just to catch people up, you had written a book called "Be More Pirate," and is this kind of like your crow's nest then?
Almost, yeah. There's a little hill walking distance from the house, about 15 minutes. It's called One Tree Hill, and it has piratical relevance because the Pirate Queen, as she was known, the first Queen Elizabeth, because she is the one who created the pirates by ceasing their ability to legally steal, which is what they've been doing for so very long, and thus they became pirates. And ironically, she became known as the Pirate Queen. But this was the early acts of diplomacy that then led to the what became the British Empire. And she would retreat to One Tree Hill, away from Westminster and Parliament, so she could be free of all the advisors, which she was not allowed to do. She wasn't allowed to go anywhere on her own, and in particular, she wasn't allowed to go anywhere with man, but she would. With Sir Francis Drake, and they would ride out up onto that hill, and they would look back over London and gaze at it and strategize. And so, yeah, I loved it when you find these little pockets of pirate history either seem to follow me around or I follow them subconsciously around, but they're wonderful things to discover.
That is so cool. What an amazing little snippet of a story. I love that.
Yeah, it suddenly occurred to me as we, it's like, right, okay. I suddenly remembered that as it comes together.
Huh. I love the word piratical. I've never heard that word before.
Yeah, I think piratical. I'm not making that up, am I?
I understand it.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate conjugation of the word of the it's to adjectivize pirate. We have become piratical.
I love it. That's outstanding. So, okay. So again, to catch people up, if they haven't read the book, and they should, and they can get the link in the show notes, and they should buy it because everybody should be more pirate to some degree or another. Could you just give us I don't know if you have this there, but Reader's Digest, condensed version of the book?
I remember the Reader's Digest, yeah. The Be More Pirate is a love letter to anyone who has ever wanted to put a cutlass through their boss, or a pistol through the red tape, or a cannonball through the computer says no. The rules of life that wrap us up and trip us over, the kind of bullshit and the bureaucracy, and the desire to break the rules, not because it's the wrong thing to do, but because it's the right thing to do. When you know what's right, yet the system says it's not. These are the moments in which I have been looking for a set of role models, because I don't think the change the world or any of us all really need is going to come from the places it's supposed to. I think there's a positive upending, a degree of professional rule breaking that's needed. And I've believed that for a long time. And I wanted to make this argument after years running social enterprises, community businesses. I have advised governments and big businesses on purpose-driven missions. I've worked in communities with young people. I've tried to tackle big social problems. And the closer you get to the powers that be, the more fucked you realize we are. And I came to the conclusion that breaking the rules is no longer the risky thing to do, as it sounds like, but very often the responsible thing to actually get things done and make a difference. But it's a fine line. It's a nuanced activity. And so I went seeking a clear set of people who were brilliant, positive and professional role models for how to break the rules in the modern age. And I can't think of a better set of stories than those of Golden Age pirates.
Wow. I love it. There's a quote in the book, and I'll paraphrase because I'll probably get this wrong, but it was like, I'd rather be a pirate than in the Navy. And that was Steve Jobs, I believe.
Yeah, the first draft of the book was actually the most boring book on earth and ever in history. It truly was. It was called Purpose First, and it was because I was leaving a world where I'd been a CEO, I'd been starting businesses and social projects since I'd been a teenager, and a time had come to, inverted commas, grow up, and so writing a book was my vehicle to do so. And I'm very passionate about creating change, and I really believe in the levers of change being in people's hands, and I think business is a very effective way to potentially do that. And I wanted to make the argument for this, and so I wrote this very boring book in an attempt to grow up. And but as is my way, I do so most things collaboratively, and so I'd got some sessions in a room above a bar in English. And I was doing a little book reading to people I know, change makers, innovators, entrepreneurs, and rule breakers. And they just looked so bored. And then eventually one guy I really know and trust, he said, Sam, what's happened to you? You sound like my granddad. Where are all the pirates? And he said, whenever you've ever done work with us before, you're talking about rocket ships and pirates and adventure. And what is this persona that you've become? And I knew in my heart, it was me trying to be a grown-up, right? Here I had to do something adult. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to be serious. And I lost myself. And so I went back to my desk and went to the British Library and then the Royal Greenwich Maritime Museum and started thinking to myself, why have I used this reference point all my life? Why do I call myself a pirate? What's in it? And I found a set of historical facts that I'd never, ever heard before, and that have, I think, been sadly absent, and that when you reveal them, truly qualify pirates as the rebels and rule breakers and the role models that we need for correct and appropriate rebellion in the times that we're in.
Wow. Would you mind unpacking that a little bit for us? And specifically, what are some of these, things that you found that are important for us to know? So the Golden Age pirates, and we're talking about a period of time from the end of the 1690s to the mid-1720s, so about 30 years. But that was the average lifespan at the time. So, in relative terms, a long time. And there's a series of events that have taken place, right? The last couple of decades have seen a series of interconnected international conflicts, and no one really knows who's the good guys and the bad guys anymore. Everything's been upended. There is the promise of democracy around the corner. The whole of Europe looks like it's going to be thrown into rebellion. We're 100 years away or so from American independence, but the squall is forming in the air. There is a new story of independence and democracy the world over, and the powers that be are somewhat scared, and they're holding tightly to their power.
And at the end of this era, which is how it feels, there's a generation who are losing out, they're missing out, and they know it. There is no opportunity or agency afforded to them, and the majority of the ways that they were employed and their fathers were employed no longer exists because this new technology, this new diplomacy is arriving. And following a massive pandemic, opportunities are even more rare. Okay, sounds kind of familiar, particularly considering this is exactly 300 years ago. And so a group of individuals, kind of millennials of their day, because we're talking about roughly 30, in their 20s, set out to sea, as was the number one industry in England then. And they set out to sea, and with the opportunity of stepping away from the, inverted commas, rules of the day, they had an opportunity to create their own rules. And it's the big surprise of pirates. Pirates are a very accountable set of communities. Not the irresponsible rogues. There's some roguish tendencies, and we shan't shy away from those. But something happens when you step outside the rules. You become rather accountable to the new rules that you create. So on board these pirate ships in these sophisticated communities, new rules began to emerge in contrast to those which they'd tried to escape. So for instance, in the Royal British Navy, if there was no pay, there really was no pay. There was a time when people were press ganged on board ships and they were paid little slips, promises, chits I think they were called, which were often never translated into actual money. On board a pirate ship, the pay was distributed systematically and equally. I mean, or at least equitably. So the lowest paid person, a cabin boy perhaps, would get half a share, and the captain might get 5 shares. But there was a transparency to everybody's share, with a quartermaster, a doctor, a sailor, and a gunner getting their proportional amount in between. There was a democracy on board a pirate ship. Every person on board could vote in every single strategic decision that was made, and if the captain behaved with a lesser amount of confidence, courage, or clarity than people might expect, they could be voted out at any given moment. So when I say accountable, I mean accountable. Imagine where you work, dear listener, being able to vote the boss out on a Wednesday because they've been terrible all year. And if enough of you vote on it. So there's only one company that I've ever come across where this similar level of accountability takes place. What else? So there was a level of holacracy. So this ultimate democracy was taking place throughout throughout any voyage, until a conflict emerged. And when a conflict emerged, dynamically, there was suddenly complete control. You couldn't challenge the captain until the conflict was over. So without even mention, this dynamic shift takes place. There was a form of workplace compensation that predates the Workplace Compensation and Employees Act by 125 years, and that's why pirates are famous or infamous for their hooks and peg legs and eye patches, because again, if you were on the Spanish Armada or the Dutch Navy or the Royal British Navy, you get seriously injured, you'd probably be left for dead. Whereas on board a pirate ship, you'd be looked after, you'd be given another position on board. You might become a cook or something else, and you'd be given a payout, an actual payout. So that's why you had these disabilities. There was a pension scheme. There was same-sex marriage. On the Royal British Navy, you'd be punished by the lash until dead for homosexual acts. On board a pirate ship, they had a civil sex union, which even was so sophisticated, it had an inheritance clause. So if there was a loving couple on board, one of them died, the other would inherit their wealth. So, this is a set of sophisticated ideas, some of which the world has caught up with, some of which parts of the world still haven't caught up with. And there's no question, I'm not suggesting whatsoever that the pirates were forward-thinking liberals who were like, right, I'm going to help you guys design the kind of practices that we're still debating. We're 200 years away from pay equality, and pirates had a degree of it. They were regularly releasing slaves with equal status, regardless of ethnicity. The same level of decision-making was taking place on board pirate ships by the mid-1720s. Not at the beginning. At the very beginning, I wouldn't want to be totally, unfairly positive towards them. There's a lot of shadows around the pirates. But these are all historical documented facts. And you did eventually, towards the end, you had both female pirate legends, you had black pirate captains. So, this is a short period of time, and this is what I think can happen when a smart group of individuals decide to stand up against the status quo and rewrite the rules for themselves. They come up with interesting ideas, and in this petri dish, their ideas have remained, and they've permeated, and they've gone out, and some of them have held ground with us now.
Wow. Holy shit. That is fascinating.
And it's all...
What's the name of the one company that you cited as the one company that you know of that
Yeah, well, I think I would call it a pirate company. So as you then like look for the traces, because by the end of the 1720s, the pirates were fucking decimated, flattened, right? And it wasn't because they'd been stealing gold. That was a well-trodden profession that lots of people, the British were stealing gold better than anyone else was stealing gold. The real problem with the pirates was these ideas had begun to ferment and take hold. People were talking about them the world over, and as Europe rumbled towards revolution, as Russia rumbled towards revolution, as England was terrified of returning to a civil war, and as the founding fathers, in their most nascent sense, were, and this is on record, working with the Golden Age pirates. They were using them as a form of armed militia against King James. Blackbeard was in cahoots. There are all these letters between the pre-colonial, the post-colonial founding fathers and the governors that you had out there, using this armed militia to tee things up, heading towards the Boston Tea Party. And at the end of their time, many of the pirates, under the guidance of Henry Avery, had taken these ideas off ships and onto an island. So you actually had this early stage, like democracy forming, where these ideas were beginning to be implemented, and those lands were owned. The colonial governors were surrounding them. It's impossible that such similar ideas couldn't have permeated their way both towards the Declaration of Independence and in the United Kingdom. The next generation, I would say, of pirates is the cooperative movement. The cooperative movements were born out of towns and villages miles away from where the most legendary pirates had lived and were born. And in the cooperative movement, there are 7 founding principles. 6 of them are consistently found in the pirate codes. Principles of fairness, principles of equality, principles of decision-making, the things that we've just discussed, of looking after the injured, right? I couldn't find an accurate record to link these two things together, but we're talking, a relatively few years apart, geographically close, similar ideas that are beginning to mature, let's say. The pirates had a bluntness to them, of course, but the evolution, once they were squashed, the same working class people stood up against the same odds and were still trying and fighting for fairness, and so they evolved into the cooperatives. I think that's a clear logical step. And those cooperatives became trade unions, which were absolutely necessary in the fight for equality. The pirate stories were known to be shared amongst the proto-feminist literary circles of London. Some of those pamphlets, and a pamphlet with the image of Queen Anne Bonny, the pirate legend, was found in the studio of Christian Delacroix, who, of course, painted Lady Liberty leading the brave, the most iconic image of female liberty, which is thought, because he designed it, went on to inspire the Statue of Liberty. So it's a stretch of history to suggest that the Statue of Liberty is based on Anne Bonny, but there is also a line. And one of the greatest cooperative-based businesses in the United Kingdom is called the John Lewis Partnership. Created by a man called Speed and Lewis in 1918, and he didn't call it a cooperative at the time because it would have sounded too Bolshevik, but it is completely owned by all of its partners, and it's been one of the most successful, enduring British retail success stories. It's a business that is loved deeply across the country, and it's remained successful even though it holds on to these really, really sincere values. And its chairman can be outvoted at any time by the partners.
Wow. I feel like I stumbled into this world that I only had this little thread of an idea about, and now, like, as I pull the thread and reveal what's beneath, I'm enthralled all the more. Now, I would talk about pirates all day long, but I'd like to cleverly segue over to Sam. And you talked about working for social, and I wouldn't say social justice, but like social change movements. But if we went back in time to young Sam, wherever Sam happens to be in the world, when he decides that, there's probably a bit of a pirate growing, what is it about you? What happened? Like, can you take us back in time and sort of help share that story?
Yeah, okay. So Sam's always lived in South London, not very far away from Peckham. Kind of the infamous parts of South London, Brixton, Peckham, has largely been where I'm from. I've always had a distinct sense of justice or injustice. Fairness feels very important to me. I think almost to a degree of childishness, like kids can't tolerate it when something's not fair, they can't compute it. It's somewhere like in that kind of domain, I think, in me. And I had the kind of, in one sense, actually that's probably taking it back a bit too far, but I grew up with a sense of both fairness and equality and the kind of the privilege of seeing different worlds, I think. I grew up in a relatively rough bit of South London with a single mum and my grandma and my sister. But I also had enough privilege in my life before my dad died. He was a lawyer and my mum was a teacher. And so before they kind of downsized and we moved area, I kind of had a sense of two different lives, I think. And so as I kind of grew up through this fairly frightening school, I had a sense of perspective of what was right and fair. And also I had a sense of identity, and I've always had an ability to exist in multiple worlds, to understand different perspectives, and that's both entirely useful, but you also can see the disparity. There's a degree of unfairness and realization in empathy, I think. And so as a teenager, I was a bit confused and lost. I had a couple of jobs temporarily. I liked making things. I ran nightclubs for a while. I tried chefing. It was clear I was going towards trying to make things. And out of the nightclubs, ran this promotions business, which was incredibly good fun. But I tried to dress it up as an activist agency to try and save the world. And these two things weren't really congruent. And so I got in tons of trouble, several death threats, and just nearly blew the whole thing up.
Oh, shit.
But a lovely idea emerged out of it. And I created a marketing agency that would exist for social good. We'd convince the brands that are selling kids the shit they don't need, be it trainers and phones and stuff, but we'd get them to do it in a way that made a difference. We'd reallocate their money towards the communities that needed it, and instead of getting them to think of young people and young audiences as just their opportunity, we would try to teach them that young people were also their responsibility. If you teach an inner city kid that his values are defined by the brand on his cap, and he believes you have a responsibility to those values. And so we started this idea, this experiment, and it was in inner city South London, and we got this amazing warehouse. And the engine room of this business's success was that we opened the warehouse up to the very same young people. So by day, you know a bit about this kind of world. So we were a full service marketing agency, branding, creative, client management, strategy. But success for us was when the team was outnumbered by the young people that came in the office. So we might have kids that were excluded from schools, kids who've been in gangs, kids who are refugees, kids who were single parents, kids in care, and they'd come to this massive warehouse for work experience, training, a chance to do their homework, support, mentoring, guidance with housing. We would do so we were a full service youth program funded by commercial clients. The work we would do was inspired by the insights of the young people that we shared space with, and we were unfucking beatable. We beat the biggest agencies in the land. We had this raw connection to insight and knowledge and technology and trends, and from Christ knows who would we know now, from Ed Sheeran to Stormzy. We had all of those people in the office long before they were ever known, because when you got access to that kind of cutting edge culture, you can do something really remarkable. So we gave platform to tens of thousands of young people. We created campaigns that reached millions of young people and helped them with whether it be literacy, sexual health, identity, and that we managed to create it all funded entirely by the brands that were also trying to sell them products. It was a glorious and wonderful time. And whilst I set out to help those young guys, I probably learned more from them than I ever did anything else in my life. And that's probably what began to draw me towards this notion of piracy, that innovation rarely happens in the center or under a spotlight, but always at the edges.
Wow. You're a fascinating guy, Sam.
Thanks, Michael.
I appreciate deep thought and rebel thinking, clearly. I like people that notice when things aren't right, and also don't try to force what their right is, but maybe explore, how to find that, or at least, unearth it for others as well.
Yeah. It's a frightening place to live in, isn't it? When you realize that you really don't know how much you don't know, but you know that it's a fuck of a lot.
It is it's a terrible but beautiful place to exist.
Yeah, yeah. And when you accept that there is, there is no objective right, and there can't be.
Yeah, which is also a terrifying
Yeah,
and liberating place to live.
yeah, 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 yeah. And those
To
are,
that point.
yeah.
Oh no, go ahead, keep going.
And I think that it's, rebellion is a catalyst, not necessarily a permanent state. It's not a location, and it's hard to be a rebel as a point of identity because it is dynamic, and the change that we create as rebels then becomes the state. So it's the notion of anything that's, many of the pirates became part of the mainstream. Many of the trends that have disrupted, we were mentioned Steve Jobs. I didn't complete the story of Steve Jobs. In the 1980s, Apple was technically insolvent, I believe, and him and a small group of people did an offsite, and they actually put a pirate flag up on the corner. There's a picture of them there. And they used the phrase, rather be a pirate than join the Navy. And the Navy was, of course, IBM. And they came back from that offsite, and the strands of thought are alleged to have become the Mac Classic. And then, as a result, the change of the world. And that's why the Jolly Roger flew above Apple when Steve Jobs died. But when Steve Jobs died, Apple was no longer a pirate organization, not by anyone's estimation. Yeah. Whereas it was when he began. But that journey... they're not. So there's that thing, isn't there, of the rebel and the disruption becoming the norm is an interesting thing to watch. And much like we said, all those pirate facts, they weren't doing that to design workers' rights 100 years forward, but they made such great big waves at the edges that the ripples went so far that they eventually affected the mainstream.
Yeah, that's cool. There's an amazing movie, which I haven't seen in a long time, called The Pirates of Silicon Valley, which talk about that entire narrative. That's that whole story, Apple and, Windows at the time, Steve Jobs versus Bill Gates. And, Park was a big part of that story as well. It's fascinating story. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a really cool part of history that we lived in, and that has affected our life so tremendously.
I ended up with that as the quote on the front of the book when I would, once I'd gone from that very, very boring book to this very interesting book, I became obsessed with getting it written, because once I'd found the true story of pirates, right, it took quite a while to corroborate the research. Like, this is too good. How is this story not better known? That's crazy. Right. And then I was like, someone else must be writing the same book as me. So I was trying to write it quickly, and I was trying to make sure that it didn't, that it had as much spirit and punch and power as it possibly could. So at this point, Liberty, the social enterprise, had really expanded, and I went to Baltimore. We had offices in Nairobi and in Cape Town and Johannesburg and Athens and all manner of places where there was such kind of community strength and innovation, but also a lot of disruption and a lot of disadvantage. And in those groups, I've often found, huge inspiration. So I was running a session around my ideas for Be More Pirate with young social entrepreneurs in Soweto, right? And I'm like, if these guys get it, then it's going to fly. And they're talking to them about these ideas in the book. And they got up at the end, these guys, and they're like, we get it, Sam, we get it. Yes. Pirates fuck shit up. And I was like, no, guys, no, that's not it. It's not about like a creative or a destructive act. No. It's a creative act. And they were like, no, Grandad, you don't get it. To fuck shit up in the kind of youth slang of being a up and coming cool kid from Soweto means to go out and be the change in the world. And I was like, oh, cool. Sorry. And I went away with a really daft idea that I was going to write that on the front of the book. As like my kind of copy quote. Yeah. But luckily, obviously, I got talked out of that. It was just a very bad idea for a small, middle-aged man hanging out with cool kids in Soweto. Thinks he's down. Then I had to pitch these cover ideas, and I was really adamant. The cover that we got away with in the UK, it's not the same as the US-Canada one. It has no title and it has no name. And I had to pull off all manner of tricks to get this cover through, right? To kind of cause this rebellious act. And so all it has is a graffitied pirate stencil. And I put on the front when I was pitching the book, the Steve Jobs, because I know that books have a quote on the top from someone famous who's read the book. But at that time, I didn't have anyone famous who'd read the book. So I just thought, oh, I'll find a good quote. So I stuck the Steve Jobs quote on the top of the book. So it's my book. It looks great, lovely cover. And it says at the top, I'd rather be a pirate than join the Navy, Steve Jobs. And I didn't realize, but during the process of publication, all of the editors at the publishers assumed that I must have permission from the Steve Jobs estate to have put that on the book. 'Cause, you know, what kind of idiot would put a Steve Jobs quote on the front of his book without permission? But you know what it's like. You know about brands, right? When you're pitching, anything goes because you're pitching.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll deal with it after.
Yes. That is an accepted future truth that is tolerated in the pitch universe, right? All things go. And then we'll work out what's actually going to happen. And then I realized about 2/3 of the way through that everyone thought that this was true. So I just kept my mouth shut.
Amazing. Well, it was in the, not even the zeitgeist. I mean, it's in record. It's on record as having been said.
Sure.
So
I don't think you can put it on the front of the book you're selling now. I think. I mean, you know, we can't put words in his mouth, obviously, but I think he'd approve.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, so let me take you on a journey, a small, sweet sojourn down. We'll say, I don't know. I've never been, but I'm going to say Rye Lane. Imagine, if you will, you're walking down Rye Lane, and I don't know if it's got shops. I kind of feel that it must.
It has many shops and Rye Lane Market.
Okay, and maybe you're heading to the market. Maybe you're heading for a pint. I don't know what it is that you're doing, but it's a sunny day, and you're walking down the road, and you're thinking to yourself, or you're walking down the lane, I should say, I really wish the world knew this one thing. What is that one thing that you wish the world knew?
I thought for a long while that there was going to be some kind of moment of an opportunity for universal change, that surely the majority of people saw, like I did, that the intolerable unfairness around us all was no way of getting on, and that these ideas that I had weren't naive, that surely we all want things to be better, right? That surely there's a principle of equality and fairness, and isn't there this joy of connection and collaboration, and surely everyone else has the same experience, that when you meet unexpected people and you find a point of connection to join you together, great things sparks. You know, life, isn't it all wonderful? Even the scary bits, even the disagreeable bits, and we must all want to come together to both protect this planet and look after one another. And yes, hideous things happen, but our intellects and our emotions, you know, these things must win out. And there are grown-ups in charge who've got plans to pull us together. And one day we'll get democracy right, and one day the technology that we're inventing will fix the things that we fucked up, and one day we'll overcome the economic inequality that puts these conflicts at the heart of society, and one day we'll overcome the prejudices upon which the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy is built, and one day some grown-ups have got a plan to dismantle this shit and make it the kind of utopia that it should be. And I've walked around like that for most of my adult life. And gradually, as I began to have the opportunities to work with senior leaders of large organisations, and then with, you know, local ministers, and then junior ministers, and then prime ministers, you know, leaders of countries, leaders of companies that are bigger than countries, you realise they don't know what they're doing, or they're making it up, certainly. And I've never yet met, you know, even when you're in number 10 or the civil service, eventually I began to wonder, like, hopefully they've got some secret fucking ninjas under the stairs who are working on a plan, like some kind of unilateral combined plan between countries, you know, with a 10-year, 20-year vision. Yeah. Oh my God. And they don't? What, seriously? Where are the grown-ups? And so I began to, you know, and then probably this is what spun me towards piracy. There's once a famous quote by a politician I admire who's now long dead, and he said he worked all his life to get his hands on the levers of power, only to realise they weren't connected to anything. And,
oh my God.
Yeah, it's frightening because it's true, right? And And so these last few years, in watching what piracy has done and my more recent work into uncertainty, I no longer am holding out for the kind of the old paradigm of savior style leader who is going to unite the earth behind them, because there is no singular right. What I hope for is this, and this is the answer that I think I would hope everyone to be able to one day realize, that we're all reaching towards something, and it's far closer than we think. But between us and the things that we believe for ourselves, the things that we want, the limiting beliefs that we're all walking around with, we think it's just us. We all think it's just us, tripping ourselves up, that we're the idiot, that we can't possibly do that thing, that idea we've got, the dream we have, the vision we would like to make real, the belief we've got, the love we have, the thing that we think is weak or that we shouldn't say. It's so close and so far away all at once. And we're all there all of the time. And every now and then you get to push through the paper walls of the rules of society and cultural norms and things you shouldn't say. And every now and then, in response to pushing through those walls, you get a moment of magic, of connection, of love, of how things could be. And then we retreat because that's scary or shouldn't be said. Because those limits, those curtains that are around us feel so thick and so present. And so I no longer hope for a singular positive revolution. I hope for 9 billion revolutions of us all as human beings, like realizing that there is a greater power, a sense of connection, of positivity. Call it what you will, whatever your spiritual beliefs are, the thing that connects us all and the reason that we're all about this, no matter what our interpretation of it is. And it's not going to be told to us, it's going to be found in us. And what I see and why I believe that is not because I've taken magic mushrooms, although I have, but it wasn't there that I got to it. It was through the work of pirates and uncertainty. When you see somebody connect to power within, I mean, that's it. I think that's the thing that we're looking for, the thing that we're waiting for. And as somebody who has struggled with anxiety and really limiting beliefs and a very strong inner critic, you realise those are constructs handed down or that we've allowed ourselves to pick up that we can really rather do without. And when you are free of them for a while, it's what it means to be alive.
Thank you. That's an amazing answer. Appreciate that.
I live with it quite a bit at the moment. When I said at the beginning, I'm feeling good because I haven't been feeling so good. I've been in the not, surrounded by those voices and limiting beliefs and feeling, frankly, like a bit of a failure and overwhelmed. And maybe that's why I'm feeling and sounding somewhat evangelical about how good it is to step into the light, it being your own light.
Yeah, that's the best light to be in.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So what are you doing right now? Like, let's catch us up to present day. Like, what is the life of Sam?
I am a scientist, a pirate scientist. I've become a scientist. I now co-lead with the amazing Catherine Templar-Lewis, the cognitive scientist who's given me my rather rapid informal PhD these last few years. And together we lead the world's largest research study into the human impact of uncertainty. I've come to the conclusion this is probably the most strategic challenge that we could overcome. It's one of the things that we all avoid as human beings, but if you can get your head around it, if you can get your heart around it, if you can get your arms around uncertainty, we have a chance to make a really significant change. Uncertainty is the number one driver of anxiety. It's what sits behind most conflict and economic instability. It really is the meta threat behind most of the other stuff, whether we're worrying about climate change and our inability to come to any kind of unilateral agreement, or we're worrying about the bullshit at work next week, or we're worrying about our relationship or our partners, or we're worrying about money, whatever it is, underneath it all, the reason that makes that feel so painful or keeps you awake at the night or makes you feel sick is our relationship with the uncertainty that sits around it. And uncertainty is core to our survival and has been for many, many years, but it's now rife. There's the World Uncertainty Index and many others who will all argue these are the most uncertain times in human history. And you might think that's ridiculous. Of course, every time in human history has been the most uncertain. However, there's a number of competing factors. Why the World Doomsday Clock? Have you ever come across that? Panel of global scientists move a metaphorical clock hand close to midnight, midnight being our own destruction. I think we're 30 seconds to midnight. We're certainly the closest we've ever been. So our response, our natural threat response to uncertainty is thrown all out of whack. And that's why so many people are languishing, so many people are deeply anxious, so many of us are deeply unsatisfied, and so many of us are looking to false salves and safeties, whether it's, that extra glass of wine or that extra hour scrolling, because we turn away from uncertainty. And I found myself in a really profound moment of uncertainty a couple of years ago. And as someone who's called for change all his life, I felt like a little bit of a hypocrite because it was a bit too much change, all coming at once. I got divorced, I got 2 kids, I'd left Liberty, things kind of collapsed post-COVID. I fell into deep financial debt. It was a clusterfuck, to put it lightly. And in looking for leaders who could truly talk about the fragility of uncertainty, because even then in that moment, I didn't lose my sense of optimism or positivity. Like, it seemed that in this fragility of the world, there's a chance for the cracks to appear from which we might pull something better. And I looked up the UK government, the US government, Canadian government, Australian government, lots of different kind of senses of leadership, and the typical cabinet office at the time was made up of particularly 3 career paths: finance, law and media. And it just really began to occur to me how little experience of actual uncertainty we have. And what happens is that we go to false narratives, backward looking narratives, and this happens all the time when in that exact moment of the new, who holds on to the space of the unknown, or who reaches for what you already know? Most of us, when the brain is struck by novel ideas and you're just supposed to spend more time there and discover what's truly emerging, how many of us just immediately reach, panic, go for the old idea? Wait, I've done this before. I've been here. Let's build back better. Let's make something great again. And it being the back and the again, which is the important thing. So I started to interview people who I believed could be called uncertainty experts, and that's the name of the research. So I interviewed refugees who are now CEOs, people who've been homeless who are now business leaders, people who've been smugglers who are now trauma specialists, gang leaders who are business leaders, people who've been through gender transition or the justice system. And I began to identify and isolate a series of very clear and distinct tools that they used for turning uncertainty into opportunity. And once I could isolate those, I had something like a good story and a solid toolkit. And, in the UK alone, there's 12 million people living on the breadline. There are 1.2 million people living homeless. There are 3.6 million single parents. There's 360,000 people living in gangs. I mean, if you just add to that the veterans, the people with mental health anxiety, these are just people who get to the end of the week of uncertainty. And so if you can then identify a very clear pattern, a set of tools, and then I met Catherine, who together introduced us to the Decision Making and Uncertainty Laboratory, a specialist research centre that sits in the neuroscience department at University College London. And turns out, what a niche, they'd been looking at decision making and uncertainty for 10 years since the end of the financial collapse. And their findings, their meta-analysis of the best theoretical frameworks for tackling uncertainty, lined up exactly with the stories of my rogues, rebels, and unusual suspects. And so we pulled this together in the middle of lockdown. I built a green screen in the kitchen here and a little sound stage. And I did an online course about online courses, and I learned to edit. I did a documentary course with the NYU online, and I turned it into a documentary. And we've already mentioned Future Truths. I'm a big believer in Future Truths. I went on Fiverr and I got a lovely designer to make me a film poster for the uncertainty experts. And I presented it as the world's first interactive documentary, scientifically proven to increase your tolerance to uncertainty. Which it wasn't. It didn't exist. We hadn't made it. We didn't know what it was going to be. And we put tickets on sale.
Sounds uncertain.
It certainly was. It was certainly one of the most creative and exciting moments of my life. We gave ourselves 6 weeks. And 6 weeks later, the tickets had all sold out. And a pilot crew went through it. The last of my savings, last of the family savings, credit cards, everything, right to the hilt. And 500 people went through it. And we ran it against the control group. The academics at UCL measured their uncertainty tolerance before, measured their uncertainty tolerance after, and then at 6 weeks. And we realized a statistically significant, higher than statistically significant increase in their tolerance to uncertainty. that lasted. I mean, it almost outperforms online CBT and other really well-established methods. And this combination of story of these remarkable characters, like you cannot lean in if you're getting this really eloquent advice from this guy who used to smuggle huge amounts of drugs. And yet he's now telling you how he overcame imposter syndrome as a smuggler, because smugglers get imposter syndrome too. You know, it's like you're just done. You're deep into this really good advice. And then Catherine, who's just this wonderful science communicator, comes on and explains what's going on in the brain. You know, what cognitive restructuring is, and how you can do it really easily, and how it will enable you to find your way through your short-term fears. And then the show, I reach out to the audience and I ask them to reflect upon their own experiences. Their reflections are amassed through a QR code into a series that then enables them to look at their own life and experiences and reframe it for the world of uncertainty. And would you believe it, the last 2 tickets to this pilot were bought by 2 wonderful execs at Netflix. And shortly after, they gave me a development deal, which, when I'm not exaggerating at all, saved my life financially. And I worked with them and Catherine. They encouraged me and Catherine to present together, to work on our chemistry. They said I could never present again. We had to do this as a twosome. And these 2 wonderful women gave us creative guidance and advice. And we then built it into something. It's not on Netflix, it's online. But between them and UCL, they gave us the backing of science and story. And now we have this amazing proposition. Catherine and I are business partners in this thing. We fell in love during the process and they're going to be married in June. And, you know, not only have I... Yeah. Exactly, yeah.
Stop it.
It's true. Found a whole new chapter of life and understanding of love, of things that I didn't think I'd ever get, of the great uncertainties and fears that I had. And people can come through this thing.
And uncertainty.
Yeah, you, the listeners, we can provide access to everybody. We run it as a live cohort a couple of times a year. It's a joyful thing to watch. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, it'll make you find something out about yourself, and I will leave you with tools and a new outlook and an ability with navigating uncertainty.
I will put links in the show notes and shout it from the mountaintops, uncertaintyexperts.com and some other stuff after that. But I'll make it easy for anybody just to click that.
Amen.
Because hell yeah, Sam.
Yes, great thing. And we have no idea, if someone out there can help us, we have no idea what the business model for this thing should be, what its full application should be. People go through this, we're told every single day we get a note from someone who's been through it, and they've gone for the job they never believed they could have. They've stood up to the boss that has always been treating them like shit. Whatever their experience of uncertainty is, and uncertainty is a subjective thing, right? They've been able to tackle it in a very, very different way. We run free places for health workers in the UK who are totally burnt out. We are running a program now looking at how it can be accessed by young people where anxiety is like an epidemic. We know that, you know, in times of elections, people with low tolerance to uncertainty are more likely to fall for extremist tendencies. We know when there's civil unrest, communities with low uncertainty tolerance are more likely to erupt. There's a deeply useful place for this tool to increase the tolerance of uncertainty, either in the institutions that are creaking or the communities that are most needing. Like, there's something really good that can come out of this, and we've got something that can be delivered at scale and is fun to watch in a medium that we're familiar with. So we're on the brink of something great, but we're in that startup mode. There's 4 of us in a little office trying to stick the wings on a plane that we don't have a business model for. So, you know, watch this space.
I love it. Well, let's shout it from the rooftops and see.
You can help me with the branding of it. We never tell anybody, and they don't say that's fucking really interesting. But there's nobody in the world who's walking around thinking, you know what I really need? I really need to increase my uncertainty tolerance. You know, it's not a hair on fire problem. But if you're walking around thinking, I don't know what to do about work next week, or I don't seem to be able to make up my mind about this, or I'm not sure whether to change my job, then we can help, because sitting underneath all of those things is uncertainty. It's just no one's yet realised that, you know, I've got the golden egg the world needs. It's just the world doesn't know that that's called uncertainty yet.
Yeah. But what happens when you know what you don't know? Yeah. What will happen when you know what you don't know? I don't know. Do we ever know what we don't know? I don't know. So many layers.
So many layers.
But this is I think such a worthwhile endeavor, and certainly timely, and certainly piratical.
Yeah. It's a really clear through line. I wouldn't have got to this without the young people of Liberty. Their DNA is all over this, and they took me to pirates. and then watching what happened with that book and how many people found their ability to go off the edge of the map. And then when you're off the edge of the map, shit, you start leaning back, you start reaching for the boat immediately because it's scary out there. So we now need to arm people up for navigating in the unknown. So to me, they're a real logical progression.
Yeah, cartographers.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And the old
build more cartographers.
Yeah, there they be dragons. I love that notion that there's. It's questioned whether it's historically accurate, but the story goes there were 12 licensed cartographers in England by King James, and he would insist that they'd put "Here there be dragons" at the edge of the map to stop people, because Britain was at this point about to lay the foundations of this evil empire that it then had, and whilst it was busy, raping and pillaging and looting its way around the world, if it hadn't done that yet, it would put "Here there be dragons" at the edge of the map to stop any other sailors or explorers going off the edge of the map. Unless you're a pirate, of course, where dragon becomes compass point north.
There's so many great quotes in this episode, Sam. I can't even stand it. I'm just tickled pink. Man,
I think that might be a great quote in itself.
Yeah. Oh my God. So I would, I could continue this conversation for days, and I will have to get to Peckham, and we'll have to go for a walk to the Rye and grab a pint or something like that.
Right on.
But until that time, love it. Until that time, what advice do you have for, we'll call them, I'm going to call them pirates in waiting. Normally they're rebels in waiting for this show, but I'm going to switch it up just for you because I think it's worthy. So these are the people that are about to do something big, or they're just like said, fuck it to the status quo. I need to make a change. What's your piratical advice?
I have been transformed in the last year and a half by something that I wish I'd known before. And it has a couple of words in science for it, but we know it as our gut instinct. And I think most of us think that our gut instinct is a secondary or even tertiary level of intelligence. We say it sometimes with pride. We say it sometimes with a degree of, sheepishness. How did you make that decision? With my gut? It comes out at different moments, doesn't it? But each and every one of you know full well that some of you have made the biggest decisions of your life with your gut instinct. In a world increasingly hurtling towards an over-deference to data, I think it's going to become increasingly important. And there are two things that I'd offer to pirates in waiting from a science pirate. And the first is called interoception. Interoception is your eighth sense, and it will help you navigate. It'll become your set of stars. The pirate that I know who encolded me into the brethren of the coast told me how he used to navigate by running his fingers in the water, and he could feel the currents. And interoception will be your ability to do this. Interoception is the eighth sense. You already know about your sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and the others. The eighth of the human senses is your ability to interpret your internal signals. So kids have terrible interoception, right? My kids don't know whether they need a wee or they're worried. It's very boring on a long car journey. If you have high interoception, you can shut your eyes and you can feel your heartbeat. There's a recent study, and you will see interoception everywhere in the years to come. Try and Google it now. It's spell check won't recognize it. It's considered to be the hottest topic in neuroscience. It's a stupid sounding phrase, but look it up. It's the case. This brilliant research study that's out by Dr. Sarah Garfinkel demonstrates that the most successful investment bankers and traders have incredibly high interoception. And the better we get at interpreting these inner signals, what is that feeling when you get it in your chest? Are you the kind of person that gets a red flush on the back of your neck when you feel uncomfortable? Does your skin go tingly when you know there's a threat nearby? When suddenly there's information that you weren't expecting, when the budget changes, when the time changes, when the team changes, when leadership changes, when someone calls your name out loud, where do you feel it on your body and what does it mean? And the way to improve this skill is to reflect upon it, feel it, trust your body, tame your body. If you name it, then you can tame it. Your body has 50 million sensors in it that operate at the same time frame that your brain can do 50. The compression rate between body and brain is insane. All large language learning models are based on machine learning, which is based largely on cognitive functions. There's no technology that I know of that's even in production which works with an emotional intelligence. If you want to stay above or ahead of AI, you need to use your embodied cognition, both brain and body working together. These two different decision-making systems linked by the largest nerve and system in the whole body, the vagus nerve, from brain to belly. And this skill of interoception will do you well, because if you're going to step off the edge of the map, you need your own chart for navigation, and you need to be able to trust yourself and know yourself. And there's a language within yourself that already exists, and you need to become fluent in it. And interoception will give you a scientific underpinning, because when we doubt ourselves, we look for other places for reassurance. And science is one of those things that gives us that, you know. I like the notion, though, that science is just play with intention. There is a curiosity to it, which all rebels should have and hold. So interoception will be an ability to see the stars, your internal measures, and it will guide you well and trust yourself better.
Thank you, Sam.
Pleasure.
There's so much. I'm going to be re-listening to this episode over and over and over again. Thank you so much. You know, your generosity of spirit does not go unnoticed. And I love that you're on this journey. I love that you're sharing the journey. Congratulations on your pending nuptials.
Oh, yes.
As well.
I met the love of my life out of the darkest time of my life. Isn't that great?
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Well, you know, as Winston Churchill was once quoted as saying, when going through hell, keep going. And I've always loved that quote because it's just kind of works.
Yeah, I mean, he was a prophetic man for quotations, wasn't he? So good at so many things and yet such a total bastard all at once.
So true. Sam, this has been an amazing way to spend time. Thank you so much for spending it with us.
It's my absolute pleasure. You know, as soon as I was first introduced to you, I've got family in Toronto. I think it was someone in Canada that introduced me. And so I started following you. And then it was that nervous thing of sending you a note. I was like, oh, I don't know, you know. And then it was your pink glasses and my pink glasses. I was like, right, this is meant to happen. But, you know, it doesn't matter what you've done. I nearly didn't press the email to send it to you if the imposter syndrome I had. Oh, well, you know, no, they wouldn't be interested in me. And so isn't it lovely? And it's just exactly what I was saying, that point earlier on, the thing I wish we all knew. I very nearly let the shadows and the cloaks and the curtains of my own limiting beliefs not contact you. And now here we are on the other side. How ridiculous would that have been? And so thank you for having me, and thank you for the conversation.
Thank you so much for listening. I've been your host, Michael Dargie, and this has been the RebelRebel Podcast. It's a podcast for creative rebels and entrepreneurs all over the world. And hey, if you're a rebel or you know a rebel, why don't you head on over to the RebelRebelPodcast.com and fill out our guest request form. We'll get back to you within 24 hours, and maybe we can share your story with the world. Don't forget to like, share, or subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And thanks so much for listening. Until next time.